Hi, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about what influenced the creation of Fallout. Now, I've already talked about, in fact, I have a whole video about the influences on the music, and I'm going to link that in the description. What I really want to talk about now is the game itself, the setting, the story, individual elements. I've decided to kind of do it backwards. I thought about this a few times, and I was going to do the general influences and then talk about the specific. Instead, what I'm going to do is talk about the specific influences, going through elements of the game and tell you what influenced us. And then I'll list games, movies, and books that had a more general influence, that there was no one particular thing we can point to and say, yeah, that movie or book. So I will start with companies. So Vault-Tec, which plays a big role in Fallout and all the subsequent games, it was a stereotype of every greedy, poorly managed defense contractor that flourished in the United States during the Cold War and after. The US still has one of the biggest defense budgets in the world. I think it's bigger than the next two or three combined. So it still exists today. So I think we all see a little Vault-Tec in all these defense companies. We just wanted to make fun of those. General Atomics, that actually specifically came from Robert Heinlein and the short stories he wrote. Many of them had a reference to a company called General Atomics, which just sort of did a little bit of everything. We also had Robco, which was just a parody of Ronco, the company that made the Popeil Pocket Fisherman and the hair spray that he made that hid your bald spot. And in Futurama, he was the guy who invented heads in jars. I like where this went later, where it became House, who was the guy who started Robco, but it just started as a parody of Ronco. Some of the products we had, like Sugar Bombs, were based on Calvin and Hobbes, because Calvin's favorite cereal was chocolate frosted Sugar Bombs, and Sugar Bombs just had to be in a game about a post-nuclear war. Nuka-Cola, I think it's obvious this came from Coca-Cola, back from when it really contained cocaine. So who knows what's in Nuka-Cola? We just thought it was funny. I honestly don't remember if that was a Scott Campbell or a Chris Taylor invention, but it was a good one. Our robots were primarily inspired by things like Forbidden Planet. We mentioned that movie before. Its robot, Robbie, which was used in a ton of other movies as well, was a touchstone for a lot of our robot designs. I remember specifically telling our designers that anything new, like a Terminator or RoboCop style design, would be denied, would be rejected. We still had someone who tried to do that. It got rejected. I guess now, though, with synths, I guess any kind of Android is now fair game for Fallout. For our advertisements, I know our artists looked at Cold War era posters, and they also looked at comic books, especially the front covers, for just how people posed and how monsters were coming at them vaguely in the background. Our weapons and armor were modeled after a lot of real world guns, but that was for the regular guns. For the lasers and plasma weapons, we looked at everything from old Flash Gordon movies and serials to things like Blade Runner. And I think you can, if you look at the images, especially the inventory images, you can see that influence. For power armor, what had happened, we needed a high-end armor, and Leonard had made one, but as he talked about in one of the chats, later on when he needed something that was more detailed to show in cinematics, that's when he made the power armor that's on the cover and in the cinematics and subsequently in the game. I know parts of it came from City of Lost Children, the helmet eyepiece. You can see that in the movie City of Lost Children in one of the characters. The tubing and vents were inspired by movies like that. The whole look of tech in City of Lost Children was very inspirational to a lot of our artists. And so our computers and some other gear, I think, also were influenced by that movie. Our radiation effects, Chris Taylor wrote the section on nuclear blast effects in the manual, and I know he used an outside source. I don't remember what it was. I think it was something Kurt Decker, one of the programmers, I think he found it. I want to say he found it in the trash, but I don't know where it came from. I know we referenced movies like Them with that 50s movie with giant ants as what we wanted radiation to do in our game. So it made giant animals like the rad scorpion. There were a lot of 50s movies that had just giant versions of regular creatures caused by radiation and to punish the mankind for having hubris. That was stuff we wanted to do. Now, when we get to ghouls, we always disagreed on that. I thought they were from radiation. Other designers wanted them to be a combination of radiation and FEV. I kind of thought, no, let's let the mutants be FEV and the ghouls are just radiation. That led to the whole idea, though, of why did the master want vault dwellers? Because they didn't have any radiation damage. Because the more radiation damage you had, the more likely FEV would turn you into a dumb super mutant rather than somebody like the lieutenant. So we had some lore going on there. We put high radiation areas in the game. The glow was one of them you had to go to. We used to say that's where things like glowing ghouls came from. They just had absorbed so much radiation that they were re-emitting it. I know we thought of a lot of the George Romero movies for the feral zombies, that they were just like what he called walkers. The radiation suits were based on things we saw in movies like 3 Mile Island, which was about the disaster of the nuclear power plant. For the effects in the game, I had already made a drug effect system, and we kind of generalized radiation off of that. Let's see, the war. We talked about we needed a big, scary, evil communist state since we were basing Fallout on being capitalistic. Russia had already declined so much in the 80s that we went with China because it fit the bill. The movie Red Dawn was inspirational about the US being invaded, except we just used China instead of Russia. I know the movie War Games had displays that showed the coast of the US being nuked and Russian subs off the coast. So we were like, hey, let's have Chinese subs. The movie On the Beach also showed a US sub reaching Australia after a nuclear war. So that got us thinking about things like that. FEV, not really sure who created it. I've had multiple people on the team tell me they created it. So, okay. I actually thought the idea was mine. I can tell you that the quadruple helix idea, when you actually read the biology reports on FEV, I wrote those reports. I researched like virions and stuff. And I remember a German microbiologist emailed us and said, hey, you were spot on that. And I'm like, yeah. But the idea for that came from a novel called Elise, which was about a woman who was immortal because she was born with quadruple DNA. Our vehicles were the idea from the wrecked ones. Road Warrior was on continuous loop in Leonard and Jason's office. They really loved vehicles, and the Chrysler and all those things I'm sure came from that. The Vertibirds, though, not the look, but the name came from a very popular toy that I owned in the 70s, which was a helicopter on a rod. And you could just basically fly it in circles and try to pick up other toys. The Brotherhood of Steel, talked about that a lot, came from Mechanical for Leibowitz. The Enclave kind of came out of the idea that because there weren't enough vaults to hold everybody, we needed a bad guy who was controlling them and using them as experiments. And that's where the Enclave came from. Dogmeat. Dogmeat has 2 different people who can claim origin, and I will explain exactly why. We had dogs in the game. We had discounted companions, but Jason Anderson really wanted them, thought it could be done, convinced Jess Hennig, the scripter, to make Dogmeat into a companion, and he did. That was the first companion we made for the game. The name Dogmeat, though, came from Scott Benny. He thought that was the perfect name. I think it was the name of the dog in Road Warrior, but it might have been a boy and his dog. Both influenced our game. The building design were old Art Deco designs that Leonard loved. So that's why they're big heads on things. The Gek, as we talked about in the chat, we never talked about that during 99% of the development of Fallout. And then when the manual was being done, we had a blank page on the end. And Leonard and Jason put their heads together. And the next thing I knew, literally a day later or 2 days later, they had a complete advertisement for this GECK. And it was thrown in the end of the manual and then became the launching point for the storyline for Fallout 2. Now, the master was a completely original idea, and I'm not sure who it came from. I just remember us talking about the FEV vats and how someone had fallen in accidentally. And someone said, well, was it a man? Was it a woman? Was it a robot? And someone else jokingly said, what about all three? The master was born. Personally, I think he's a scary, original, cool villain. I was glad to see he made the top of several top villains in RPG lists. Okay, those are all the specific design elements that I can tie into a specific inspiration. For the books, I've already mentioned Canticle for Leibowitz, and there's another book, I'm Legend, which is what Omega Man and the movie I'm Legend were based on. I should also point out that starting around 92, I had a printout of all the sci-fi novels that had won a Hugo. Not a Nebula, a Hugo. And I wanted to read all of them. I realized I had read a lot of them, but I wanted to read all of them. And Chris Taylor started doing it too. And even though I had read more than he had, Chris can speed read. So he would often leave in the evening and come in the morning and go, oh, I read A Fire Upon the Deep last night, which is a thick book. And he wanted to talk about it. I'm like, this is so unfair. I don't speed read. I mean, if I read as fast as I could luckily get through a book in a week. So Chris rapidly outpaced me, but we read all the Hugo winners. And so I'm sure there are some subconscious influences that came from those books. For the movies, I've already mentioned a lot of them. I should also mention the TV miniseries The Day After, which came out in the 80s. That depiction of what life would be in America after nuclear war, it resonated with a lot of us. Mad Max and Road Warrior, of course, City of Lost Children, Forbidden Planet, I've mentioned those. On the Beach, Dr. Strangelove, got to mention that. A Boy and His Dog. And also the French movie La Jetée, which is what eventually got turned into, years later, into 12 Monkeys. But La Jetée influenced us a great deal. It's about a guy using time travel to go back and try to avoid some nuclear war that had happened. Very interesting movie. I recommend you watch it. It's not a typical movie. It's mostly still images. And then for games, there were a lot of influences on games. Tabletop, got to mention Gamma World. That was obviously an influence. So was GURPS, of course. Wiz War was a tabletop game we played where you play wizards trying to collect treasures. That game fascinated us. We played it all the time. We made new cards for it. And I think what it was is because everybody's wizard, we're all playing wizards, but you got handed a deck, a hand of cards that meant people were playing wildly differently. And you could win by getting 2 treasures on your home square, but you could only carry one at a time, which meant you'd carry one to your home square, you go off to get the other one, and people would just steal the one from your home square. But there was another way to win, which is to be the last person alive. So some people just became, psychotic serial killer wizards and just attacked all the other wizards. It was interesting to watch because sometimes while they were fighting someone else, you'd see someone just go pick up a treasure, drop it, go get another treasure, drop it, and they won quietly off to one side while all the wizards were fighting on the other side of the board. And that hit that reactive part of my brain and went, I love this. For computer games, XCOM, wildly influential on our combat. Crusader No Remorse and No Regret, we played those. That was an isometric game. We loved playing it. We loved the look of it. The Ultima series, hugely influential on me and a lot of the other designers. And I've talked to Richard Garrett about this. Its use of the player being an avatar and being good was a strong thing for me to react to and go, I want the player not to have to be good. So Ultima made me go, I love this, but I don't want to do this. And then, of course, Wasteland. And I will clarify something Leonard brought up. So on the whole team, Wasteland was an influence, but not as strong as a lot of people think it was. There were people on our team who had never played it. There were people on our team who played it and didn't like it. There were a lot of people on our team who played it and did like it. I can tell you the biggest influence, other than the whole idea of a post-apocalyptic world and things like Rangers was the idea that there could be quests that have a moral dilemma in them. And the one I talk about a lot is when you start the game and a little boy asks you to go rescue his dog. I think he was wandered into a cave. You go in there and the dog is rabid. There's basically no way. You can run away, but there's really no way to rescue the dog. Most people end up killing it. And then you go back to the kid, and I think you can tell him the truth, or you can lie. I think you can say either the dog was already dead or you couldn't find the dog. But that stuck with me as a post-apocalyptic world has quests that provide moral dilemmas that aren't necessarily resolvable always in the best way. Sometimes the best solution is still kind of, that stuck with me. And I wanted things like that in Fallout as part of our multiple solutions. So Wasteland was an influence, just probably not as heavy an influence as people make it out to be. And just to be clear, we were never making Wasteland 2. We were making our own thing while Brian Fargo and Dick Lehrberg said they were trying to get the license for Wasteland 2, which would have made us go back and change some things. But we never actually, that wasn't a consideration in our daily design meetings. We just went, okay, if that happens, we'll make some changes. But we were making our own thing. And Fallout kind of took on a life of its own. Once Leonard had that inspirational, let's make it the way the 50s were, there was really no going back. There were things that I would have massively regretted changing to make us more like Wasteland once that idea had been realized and instantiated in the game. So that's most of it. That's all the influences I could think of. I went down a lot of elements of the game and then just some stuff that was general. I think between that and the music video, the video I made about the music of Fallout, I think that's every influence I've ever been told or can think of. So I hope that answers a lot of questions about what influenced the making of Fallout.